time at band camp, he stuck a flute in his... It's late night with the Sit and Spin. And here's your music, Nick and Kelly.
Well, welcome into the Sit and Spin radio show. I am your host, Nick O'Kelly, coming to you live on this lovely Saturday morning here in Charleston, South Carolina, from the AOK Production House, Studio 2. I did used to go to band camp in high school. Oh, I don't know if that makes that intro appropriate or not, but whatever. Yeah, did you ever do band camp? It's nothing like what you see on American Pie. Actually, it was terrible. It was like being in the military. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to compare it to that. But seriously, it was very hot, because it was always right in the middle of summer. And you're outside and you're marching around, with a rolled... We used rolled heel marching style, which was very difficult to do because you have to roll your heel. You have special shoes that allow you to kind of do that. So there was no high stepping or anything like that. It was just straight up having to force your calves and ankles to march in a specific way, and you're learning all of these routines and trying to play. And they would do this thing where they would make you keep your instrument up at shoulder level or whatever, playing level for a certain amount of time without letting it down. It's very hot out there. It was just terrible. I hated it. They always started by saying, make sure to eat and drink a lot this week because you're going to lose weight. That's what they always told us. I never lost any weight. But that's what they would say because it was so hot. They didn't want people passing out there in the middle of... I always thought to myself, why don't we just do this a week before school begins instead of doing it in the middle of summer, and then it wouldn't be quite so hot. I don't know. I guess that didn't make any sense. Well, welcome to today's episode. I have just an absolute stack of news to go through here today. This has been a jam-packed week for the news cycle, for good and for bad, and I think more bad than good, honestly. I hardly even know where I want to begin today because I wanted to start by talking about Facebook and that bit of a slide into oblivion that they went through. But now I also have this whole stack on the gun control debate backfiring. We talked about that a bit last week. Do you remember this guy, David Hogg? I think this is extremely ironic. After the Parkland shooting happened, he was the one who was from the theater department, him and his couple of buddies. They're the only ones you saw on television for the weeks after this happened, coming out and talking about how they wanted action. Trump needed to do something. We need to ban all the guns. He's running around cursing on television and challenging people like Alex Jones to debates. And then when those personalities would respond to him, he would say, no, I'm not going to debate you because you're a terrible person. And then he'd curse at them. This is the guy that was being pushed by the left as their latest attempt at turning all your guns. You remember what happened a couple of years ago? They do this every few years, where they try to tug at your heartstrings in one way or the other. School shootings are awful, and I don't want to see it. I wish that there was some way to put a stop to it, but you can't ban guns just because you have some crazy people out there, because once you de-weaponize the population, you have what's going on in Europe, where you've got J.K. Rowling coming out and apologizing for commenting on a transphobic tweet or something, and she's calling it now a middle-aged moment. This is ridiculous. I mean, you have a completely whipped population over in Europe because they can't defend themselves. They don't have free speech, even though they claim to. And that's not the world that we want to live in. That's not what America was founded on. America was founded on principles of freedom, of being able to say what you want, being able to do what you want, and live in an open society. And it's a slippery slope. Once you start banning guns, then eventually there's nothing left. I mean, we have a right here, an inherent God-given right, okay? And that's why you can't just ban these things based on the sayings of children. I mean, this guy, David Hogg, is a child. He's a high school student. He has no idea what he's saying, and he's being used by the liberal left who wants to de-weaponize the population in order to better control them. And that's what the agenda is all about. Because if you can't defend yourself, if you can't stand up for yourself, then you will be overrun by the government. And the point of the constitutional rights is that these are inherent rights. They are given by God to the population, not by the government. And therefore, the government should not be allowed to take them away either. And so it sickens me to see the left wing trying to say that we need to have gun control for this or that reason, and attempting to convince or sway the population by throwing the kids in our faces. And a few years ago, they were using actors from Hollywood, and I think the reason we see that that's not happening anymore is because Hollywood has now become so discredited with everything that's been happening recently with Weinstein and so on and so on. But this guy, David Hogg, okay, he's coming out and he's cursing on television, and he's telling you to turn in your guns because, no more. And you remember it's the exact same talking point when the actors were doing it a couple of years ago with that commercial they did. It had Jennifer Aniston, and I don't remember all of them that were in it, but they're saying enough. It's all enough. Well, now you have the kids from Parkland School doing it, and before that it was the Sandy Hook kids doing it. Now, I'm not saying that this was a staged event, but what we do know about the Parkland shooting is that there was a stand down by the sheriff's department. That has come out now, that it's on record. There is a video showing the sheriff's deputy not entering the school. He wouldn't go in. There was an active shooter. They are trained, and in fact, the guy that's seen on the surveillance camera standing down, not going in the school during the active shooting, was the same deputy that was going around to all the schools and giving trainings on what to do during an active shooter. I mean, it's unbelievable. We had it at work a couple of, it was a year ago or something, where they had an actual active shooting training. They had a sheriff's deputy come in from the local sheriff's department and taught a class on what to do in the case of a shooter in the office workplace. And I think to myself, how would it look if this same guy, if God forbid there was an active shooting, if this same guy was seen on a surveillance camera standing outside the door, not walking in when it was going on? I mean, unbelievable. Anybody, I mean, it doesn't have to be a cop, but anybody in the know who is armed, who is trained for this type of a response, wouldn't think twice about going into a situation like this and tackling somebody who is actually, killing kids. But yet there he is on their surveillance video. You can look this up. That's why there's all these posters now going around Broward County Coward Department, because he wouldn't go inside. So what's that all about? Well, this anti-gun push that's been happening by David Hogg is now backfiring, and it's a bit hilarious. I mean, I don't want to make light of what happened. I really don't, because of course it was a tragedy, and I hate to see this, and I don't want to see it anymore. And I wish there was a way to stop it. Maybe that the solution would involve getting all the kids off the drugs. I mean, to me, that seems like a more active solution than just taking away the entire population's ability to defend themselves. But of course, nobody wants to bring that up. You don't want to see anybody on television putting down Big Pharma, saying that there's too many, SSRI drugs. There's too many antidepressants that kids are on these days. They've got every single kid in the school on ADD medication. Nobody wants to talk about that, or the violent video games that they're sucked into all day long in their digital worlds. The kids aren't going out into parks anymore. They're at home playing video games, and they're on SSRIs. That's not the conversation. The conversation is that we don't need to have access to weapons. And it's always that there needs to be stricter rules. There are strict rules on weapons. And I also am getting a little tired of hearing the talking point that we need to crack down on the gun shows. That's ridiculous. You can't go to a gun show and buy a weapon without a background check. I mean, unless it's being done illegally, which is illegal, and if it's caught, then that company, it's like selling alcohol to a minor in a bar. It's not just the minor that's going to get in trouble if he's, driving later on. Let's say he kills somebody later on because he's driving drunk, okay? That's bad enough. If that was to happen and it was traced back to the bar that sold him alcohol underage, that bar is also going to get shut down. It's bad for business. So gun companies that are selling guns have to give a background check because that's the law. And if they don't, they will get shut down. They'll be demonetized. So it's in their best interest to follow the law. So they use, I guess, isolated incidents to try to confuse the public who just doesn't know any better by saying we need to get rid of the guns because anybody can get them for any reason if they just go to a gun show and blah. It's all crap. You have to go through a background check. There are regulations. The law needs to be followed. It doesn't need to be fixed. It's the same thing with immigration. I say it all the time. But let me get to this article. Anti-gun Parkland student David Hogg does not want his backpack rights infringed upon. What's happened now is that the school has now introduced a common sense, in my opinion, rule in response to this shooting that the students have to carry clear backpacks. Anti-gun Parkland High School student David Hogg is angry that his backpack rights are being infringed upon. This is from Axios. John Nolte writing this article. The left-wing Axios sat down for a conversation with Hogg. According to Axios, he is upset with some of the new security protocols that Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School is putting into place in the aftermath of last month's mass shooting. Students will now be required to use clear, see-through backpacks only. It's like working at Belk's. Have you ever walked around a Belk's and you've seen people, the employees there carrying around their clear pocketbooks? Yeah, that's what they have to do to make sure they're not stealing anything. The backpacks will be provided free to students. The reason for the clear backpack is obvious: to make it more difficult to sneak a weapon onto campus. The school is also considering metal detectors. Hogg, however, is upset about this infringement. He said, quote, "After we come back from spring break, they're requiring us all to have clear backpacks. It's unnecessary. It's embarrassing for a lot of the students." Well, you know what? That's what happens. When something like this occurs, there is a response. And this is common sense. Of course, the irony is remarkable. This is the same guy who is running around the country calling for further restrictions on every American's Second Amendment civil rights, is upset over a common sense security protocol many other schools and all kinds of retail workers have dealt with for decades. When you walk into a government building, be it a courthouse, state house, or school, you are voluntarily giving up some of your privacy rights. The idea that we are not treating school security like we do in airport security is madness. And so I think we're going to see a lot more of this, actually. Metal detectors going into schools, which I hate. But you know what? I think if you listen to this show, you know that I'm a big fan of Disney. My wife and I go down to Disney World often. We're annual pass holders. And they recently, in the last couple of years, have implemented metal detectors to get into every park. Whenever you ride the monorail around the resorts that surround the Magic Kingdom, every time you get on the monorail at any resort, you go through a metal detector. You go through a screening. They go through your bags. And it sucks. And when it first happened, it was like, oh man, this is such a nuisance. But at the same time, you think to yourself, well, at least they're attempting to add security so that I can walk around here and feel safe. It's sad, the world that we live in, that we have to have metal detectors everywhere we go. It's sad that you can't walk into hotels anymore after the Las Vegas situation because you're not sure what's going to happen. But it does give you, in some ways, that sense of security that there's something happening. And you say to yourself, well, 50, and I've said this on air too, 50 years ago, we didn't have this, and we didn't all walk around in fear of what would happen. Well, as I've said, 50 years ago, there weren't as many people on, that's the real question. What do we do about it? Were there as many people 50 years ago on antidepressants walking around? I don't know. I don't have those stats. I guess I need to do some research there. But the fact of the matter is, we are living in this situation. We are living in this world where video game violence, movie violence, television violence has hit an all-time high. That's a fact. I mean, because 50, 60 years ago, there was just not as much exposure to those type of platforms to be able to see that. And so from a very early age, you have kids now who used to be out on the basketball court growing up, are now growing up playing basketball on video games. And in fact, this esports craze now, you have actual professional athletes, quote unquote, who are professional video game athletes. It's crazy what's happening to our world. But when you have kids growing up now in front of a television playing Call of Duty, playing Halo, playing... And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with these games. I play them. I enjoy them. But I also know right from wrong, and I know that I know the difference between a video game and reality, and that you can't just go steal a car and shoot someone and slap someone in the face to take their car like on Grand Theft Auto. Kids who are drugged up and are involved in these digital worlds from a very early age, the question is, can they tell the difference? What's happening to the mind of these individuals as they grow up when that's all they are exposed to? And I think that's really the bigger question. But nevertheless, we are in a situation where the world today has caused us to have to respond to these outbursts of violence in a way that unfortunately infringes upon our privacy a little bit. That when you go into a public place where there are so many open areas and options for someone to, go crazy and attack everybody, you have to go through a screening process when you get onto a plane, which I've said for a while that I think that the TSA screening is over the top. But when you go through it, it's security theater, but for some people it does give you that sense of security. It makes you, I guess, feel better. And I do believe that it catches some things that could go wrong. You do hear those stories. Disney Paris, while we were over in Europe, there were some guys that tried to get in with machine guns, and they were caught going through the screening process. They caught them, and they didn't get to go in and do whatever they were planning to do. Now, they ended up having attacks on train stations a few weeks after that, and those train stations don't have any... That's the crazy thing in Europe. When you go to the airport, of course, there is security just like here. It's not quite as robust, but nevertheless, it's there. But when you go ride the train, there is no security whatsoever, and there were a lot of attacks. And not, by the way, they don't have access to guns there. Now, that particular situation I just mentioned in Paris, they did catch them with some machine guns or whatever. But Europe in general, the access to guns is not really very possible. So most of the attacks that we saw, and I would say the majority of them, were people with machetes, people with bombs. There wasn't a lot of gun violence. And that's why I say that banning guns is not the solution, because they will find other ways. They'll, just like in Berlin with the Christmas market. I had a friend who was there while I was over in Europe. He was in Berlin when this happened at that very Christmas market. Somebody drove into the middle of it and ran over a bunch of people. We saw that happening. You can't ban the cars. We saw the guy with the knife that went and attacked everybody in London a couple of years ago. In my town in Europe, a guy rode the train into the city. I had friends who were on the platform. He jumped out of the train with a machete, had it in his backpack, started attacking people right there on the platform. No guns, but yet you still had the attack. It can happen regardless. And so we are in a situation now where the response by responsible corporations and so forth is going to be heightened security. And now, because we're having this issue in schools, you're going to have heightened security. I believe that the teachers should be armed so that if someone comes in there with a gun, they can defend their classrooms rather than having to go and hide. I saw recently a video of a new product that's like a safe room. It's like a portable safe room, basically, that allows the kids to go hide in the corner of this thing. And I'm thinking, just give her a shotgun. So if someone busts in there, shoots him in the head, it's done, okay? But anyway, the irony is there that David Hogg, who has been talking about how he wants to infringe upon our rights to the Second Amendment, is now upset and is cussing out everybody because his backpack now has to be clear. Joe Biden said this week, Parkland students are going to win. We can beat the NRA. Friday, while in Washington, D.C. for the March for Our Lives, former Vice President Joe Biden spoke with MSNBC after meeting with parents and family members of the victims of the high school shooting in Parkland, Florida. He said the Parkland students are going to win. Well, they're going to have clear backpacks,
Former
but
Vice President Joe Biden,
he thinks they're going to beat the NRA. Take a listen.
Tomorrow here in D.C., thousands of high school students traveling for the March for Our Lives. Here is what former VP Biden told NBC's Mariana Atencio just a couple of minutes ago. Watch.
Keep going. They're going to win.
How can they achieve legislative change, though?
Watch. I did it.
How can they keep the momentum going beyond this March?
Remember, we can beat the NRA. I passed a bill to ban assault weapons, ban the number of bullets to be in the clip, change the background check. It's doable. We'll do it again because of these kids.
So, Mr. President, you've been speaking with parents of some of the victims. Can you talk about those conversations?
It's kind of private. I mean, I can tell you talk to you generically, but I don't want to spend a lot of time.
Why is it important to you to have those conversations?
I know how important it is to me.
And there you go. Because of these kids, we're going to change it. And that should tell you all that you need to know, that they are using these kids as a way to implement their agenda that they've been trying to get across for many years. We also have Citibank now requiring gun store customers to quit selling high-capacity magazines. So basically blackmailing these stores. Citibank used a March 22nd commercial firearms policy to announce a requirement that gun stores quit selling high-capacity magazines in order to do business with the bank. Here's the new policy. Under this policy, Citibank says we will require new retail sector clients or partners to adhere to these best practices. Number one, don't sell firearms to someone who has not passed a background check. Number two, they restrict the sale of firearms for individuals under 21 years of age. And number three, they don't sell bump stocks or high-capacity magazine. This policy will apply across the firm, including to small business, commercial, and institutional clients, as well as credit card partners, whether co-brand or private label. It doesn't impact the ability of consumers to use their Citi cards at merchants of their choice. So there you go. And it blows my mind that they put a policy like this in place. They don't sell firearms to someone who hasn't passed a background check. That's already the law. Citibank doesn't need to include a policy like that. It's federal law. It's weird to me, bizarre that they would put this out as if it's doing something. But the real thing here is that they won't offer small businesses loans. And that's the next step, is that if you sell guns, we won't give you money to start a business. That's the next step you watch. But it's all about, they've got everybody in debt. They've got everybody on credit with these major credit card companies and corporations. And now the next step is, if we can't get legislation passed by talking points, we're going to get it passed by your credit score. That's the next big shoe to drop, and it's already starting in China. China to ban citizens with bad social credit rating from taking flights or using trains for up to a year. This broke as well this week. Can't believe this. And actually, yeah, let's get that going. My conspiracy of the week is that we're going to start seeing people put into these digital gulags, where if you have a bad credit score, this was actually an episode on Black Mirror. If you haven't watched that, it's a pretty interesting show on Netflix. If you have a bad credit score, if you have a bad social score, is what they're calling it here in China, you won't be able to trade or shop or travel. This is the mark of the beast coming to fruition right here before our very eyes. China said it will begin applying its so-called social credit system to flights and trains and stop people who have committed misdeeds from taking such transport for up to a year. And what are those misdeeds, you say? People who would be put on the restricted list include those who have committed acts like spreading false information about terrorism and causing trouble on flights, as well as those who used expired tickets or smoked on trains, according to two statements that issued on the National Development and Reform Commission's website on Friday. Those found to have committed financial wrongdoing, such as employers who failed to pay social insurance or people who failed to pay fines, would also face these restrictions, said the statement, which were dated March 2nd. It's going to come into effect on May 1st. This is all in line with President Xi Jinping's plan to construct a social credit system based on the principle of once untrustworthy, always restricted, said one of the notices, which was signed by 8 ministries. And, of course, Xi Jinping has recently basically been made a dictator over China. He was elected to be such. It's like we're watching Hitler rise to power all over again. I'm not saying that guy is as bad as Hitler, but you never know. But how strange is this? Think about this, these misdeeds that I just detailed for you. If you fail to pay fines, you're going to be restricted from travel for up to a year. Now, the word fine is very broad-reaching. It's very generic. My wife and I recently bought a house. We are a part of a small HOA in the neighborhood that we're in. Supposedly, a small HOA means they just basically collect money to take care of the public areas. We have a big park in the middle of the neighborhood. But we've been moving in and had a trailer. We had borrowed a trailer from her parents to bring down all of our furniture. And I had the trailer sitting in the driveway for about a week because we brought it down one weekend. They live in another state, and we took it back the weekend after that. Well, we had taken the trailer back. It wasn't there, and lo and behold, we got a letter in the mail saying that there's no temporary storage allowed in your driveway, which just blows my mind because it's not a storage facility. It's a trailer. And it was a box trailer, too, a nice one, a big box trailer. It wasn't a flatbed trailer or a trailer like a camper that you're living in that was broken down or something like that. It was just a box trailer sitting in the driveway. It was smaller than the vehicles we have, also sitting in the driveway. It wasn't ugly or anything like that. But nevertheless, we got a statement saying you're not allowed to have it. And my question was, what happens if we just leave it? Are they going to fine us? It's my house. It's my driveway. I paid for it. They're just some bureaucracy. What can they actually do? Well, let's say I was to leave it there, which I didn't. It's not mine, so it doesn't matter, but it was just kind of frustrating. But let's just say, for example's sake, that I had left it there because it was mine, and they assessed me a fine. And let's say I lived in communist China right now when this occurred. Well, I would be restricted from traveling for up to a year, potentially, if the government decided that that fine that I just decided not to pay because it's ridiculous was included in that which was considered a misdeed. You see what I'm saying here? It's a very slippery slope that they're on over there, that they say that you can't travel because of fines, or if you're causing trouble on planes. Now, that could mean many different things, causing trouble on planes. It could mean that you've screamed bomb like he does in Meet the Parents on the plane, or it could mean that you punched somebody on the plane or hijacked it. Or what if the flight attendants came over to you and said, you're getting bumped from this flight, as we saw happen on American Airlines very recently, and you refused to give up the seat that you paid for, and they had to drag you off? Well, you could be banned from traveling for life, potentially, according to this. Now, how crazy is that? Well, that's what's happening in China. And if you have bad credit, I had bad credit for a while. I had some credit card debt that I was spiteful about, very upset about, for different private reasons, and I let it go for a couple of years, and it destroyed my credit. Now, I have now built my credit back up. I'm very proud of myself. I'm sitting pretty at this point, but for the past few years, I've had terrible credit, and it was very difficult to to get a cell phone and things like that. Well, if I had lived in communist China, I might not have been able to travel for the past couple of years. I might not be able to travel for the rest of my life because of that. This is what's going on, and it's a little scary. It's a little scary to think about this. All right, I want to move on from that. I do have some other news about China. It's interesting that it just so happened that China tried to implement that social structure. It's really class discrimination, right? I mean, it's kind of a new form of it. If you have bad credit, then you're discriminated against on a governmental level. Well, Trump has decided this week to discriminate against China because of stolen intellectual property. Trump imposes $60 billion in tariffs on Chinese imports, calls out Beijing on intellectual property theft, and it's about time, in my opinion. Delivering. That's what Trump's doing. Now, I'm going to change that tune in a few minutes when we start talking about this omnibus spending that's just happened, but nevertheless, Trump this week came out and said that the era of economical discrimination from other countries on America is over. And I applaud him for this. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a $60 billion package of tariffs against China. According to the White House, the move is aimed at curbing theft of intellectual property, which has been going on for decades. Trump has signed a Section 301 trade action with China that could be about $60 billion in tariffs. Unbelievable. He said, adding that he asked China to reduce trade surplus immediately by $100 billion. And we have a major trade deficit. I mean, we're talking $800 billion trade deficit. At the very least, it's somewhere between 300 and 500, but it's probably closer to $800 billion. And it all comes from the fact that we allow the imports at a very low percent tax, if any tax at all in some situations, depending on our negotiations, between us and other countries. But the reciprocal effect is that they charge us more to import our products to their country. And so we pay more money to ship our products out than other countries pay to ship their products in. That's why you see so many made in China. It's been a joke for so long, right? Think about it. How long have you said to yourself, oh, well, that's made in China. No wonder it's crappy. Because these companies have knockoff products of their own product lines built in China and shipped in at a cheaper cost than it would take to build it here and ship it out. Quote, we have right now an $800 billion trade deficit with the world, Trump said before signing a memorandum. It is the largest deficit of any country in the history of our world. It's out of control. We're going to get it taken care of. Frankly, it's going to make us a much stronger, much richer nation. Just use the reciprocal. If they charge us, we charge them the same thing. Amazing. Amazing idea. And to think that it's such a simple idea, it really brings to light, in my opinion, the agenda to deindustrialize America from the past presidential administrations, right? I mean, this is something that should have been going on for a long time. Why have we allowed a trade deficit to get so out of control with China? Well, it's because they want to deindustrialize America and bring in, all under the title of free trade, which has not been what's going on. It's free trade for China, not free trade for us. And it's because they wanted to bring China in as the global, to bring in one world government. They wanted China to rise to power and just kind of take over all of the trade. But anyway, that's a whole other topic. The announcement comes after Trump administration accused China of state-led market-distorting efforts to force pressure and steal U.S. technologies and intellectual property. Beijing officials said on Wednesday that China is ready for a trade war with the U.S., but warned it would be harmful to global trade. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua, I can't pronounce the name, said China will take appropriate steps to defend its legal rights. So Trump stepping up and starting to attempt to have real negotiations with these countries, and the WTO saying, listen, we're not going to take this anymore. You're not going to discriminate against our country. If you want our products, you're going to pay for them. If you want to ship your products in and sell them, because that's where all of their industry comes from. Their industry comes from the fact that we buy their products. So Trump's saying, if you want to sell your products and have an economy, you're going to pay for it because it's an import. It makes financial sense. Of course, they are striking back. China responds to Trump tariffs with proposed list of 128 U.S. products to target. China on Friday announced plans for reciprocal tariffs on 128 U.S. products that include pork, wine, fruit, and steel. Lucky for us, we don't need our imports to China as much as they need their imports to America. The world's second largest economy has responded to President Donald Trump's controversial trade tariffs. China's Commerce Ministry proposed a list of 128 U.S. products as potential retaliation targets, according to a statement on its website posted Friday morning.
On China
and you can take a listen here from CNBC.
Marty, I'm trying to do the math here. What is 3 divided by 60? 3 billion divided by 60. I guess that would be 5%. Yeah. Something like, yeah, I actually did that. I can't believe I actually got that done.
Roundabout. Yeah, we'll get our calculator out and figure that out and get back to you folks. But, shots fired, yes, Bernie. If you really want to be melodramatic about it, shots fired, but no man down, at least just yet. China, in fact, not just still standing, but it is firing back. The Commerce Ministry in China out with comments, and I'm paraphrasing. Basically, the message is, look, let's sit down, talk, try and settle this thing before somebody really gets hurt. On the specifics, they're saying, in the meantime, they're taking measures against U.S. products to offset the steel and aluminum tariffs, which come into force. This is tomorrow, Friday, U.S. time. These are the 232 tariffs, you remember. China will take measures in 2 stages against U.S. products if it cannot reach a deal, which I'll get back to in just a bit. Now, the first stage targets a list of 128 U.S. products with an import value of about $3 billion. This is based on 2017 numbers, so fairly modest, but it does suggest, Bernie, that they are thinking as well as planning ahead in case this situation escalates here. Now, China is also going to the WTO, filing a case against the U.S., which is a clear indication that Xi Jinping, as well as China, is or wants to play by the rules, at least for now and for a change. So I guess, if you're cynical, you might say, look who needs China, or look who needs the WTO now. Key takeaways from all this, Bernie, quick. There's time and a wiggle room out of this situation. Both sides are talking. There could be a deal in the making. Existing differences, complaints look like they're going to go to arbitration at the WTO. So in total, negotiated solution, a deal addressing the current situation, as well as ruling or redress WTO for past grievances. So that's where we stand right now, Bernie.
Marty, it looks like they're really hunkering down. As we heard from Secretary Ross earlier, he was using again that soup can argument as we've discussed this morning. They seem pretty adamant about. I know that steel is tomorrow. Today was high tech, and all that. Is there a delineation? Is there a differentiation in industries here? I mean, Trump loves his core. He was happy to put some steel workers, a handful of them, back to work at U.S. Steel mothballed plants. But if supply chains are disrupted, as we talked about in the last hour, he cares a lot less about Silicon Valley.
All right, that's enough of that. I think you get the point. So China striking back against Trump putting these tariffs in, but these tariffs should have been put in place a long time ago. And I think it shows a level of responsibility in our current presidential administration that just simply wasn't there before. All right. I want to talk a little bit about something else that's happening, a boom in our economy coming from major corporations giving their CEOs huge amounts of money. I mean, this is really crazy here. Disney's CEO Bob Iger could earn up to $423 million in compensation, an advisory firm says. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that Bob Iger, in terms of what he's done for Disney, doesn't necessarily deserve large compensation. However, I will say that being an advocate of the parks and so forth, I do see a fall in quality when you go to Disney World of the level of service that used to exist when I first started going. And I first started going really not that long ago. So even between when I started going and the level of service I saw then and what we see now and the level of disrepair, the monorail itself is broken. I mean, it breaks down a lot at this point. It's very obvious that there needs to be an upgrade done. They have, just elements of it in needing repair, needing some love, and to see that, and then to see something like this and think to myself, why can't they put some of that money back into their own services, into their own infrastructure? Now, certainly the Disney movies that are coming out are phenomenal, and it's unbelievable the kind of quality that we see, especially coming from things like Marvel and Star Wars. They're great. They really are. And Bob Iger himself has made a lot of acquisitions that's turned Disney into a dominating force in media, which when you think Disney, you think about them being something of a dominating movie studio, but that was not always the case. And certainly for my generation, I mean, we've seen it because the renaissance of Disney started with The Little Mermaid and Aladdin and all of these movies that came out in the 90s that really sort of turned that studio around. And now, of course, we've seen things like Frozen and Moana and these billion-dollar movies. But that was not always the case. And so what we've seen in the past couple of years, I mean, Michael Eisner really turned it around, but Bob Iger really built off of that success. So I'm not saying he doesn't deserve compensation, but $423 million, I mean, that's a lot of money. I mean, God, when is enough, I guess. Update, and, I'm a capitalist, so take what you can get. But it's just interesting to see this kind of a boom when we're talking about the country being in so much debt, when we're talking about issues with poverty in our cities. They got rid of Tent City down in Charleston. And, of course, in the comments, let me know what you think about this. But I have never seen this many homeless people in downtown Charleston. When I went to Europe, I noticed that it's rampant over there, people sleeping on the streets. I had read articles, and I've talked about it on this show, that heads of state in Europe, such as Angela Merkel, are starting to use creative ways to try to keep homeless people off the streets because they don't want to mandate it over there for whatever reason. So they do things like they take away park benches and they make like standing rails instead of benches and things like that. And I didn't really understand why until I went over there and really saw homeless people absolutely everywhere. I mean, they were everywhere. Not just panhandlers, just some people just laying around on the street under newspapers and so forth. And it's very sad to see that, especially in a socialist country where they basically give everything away for free. I mean, if they wanted a job, they could get it, especially when they have massive towering buildings being turned over as immigration housing facilities. And that's actually what's going on over there, and yet there's homeless people all over the street. But that's a whole other topic. The point here is that Tecklenburg, the mayor in Charleston, ran on a platform of getting rid of Tent City. If you're not familiar with Charleston, we have a bunch of interweaving bridges that lead into downtown and then over to Mount Pleasant, and they kind of go over one another and so forth. And underneath that crisscross of bridges, there was this whole plot of land that at one point, very few years ago, was just filled with tents. And it started with just a couple, and then it grew into literally this whole neighborhood, like a trailer park made up of tents underneath the bridges. And when we had our new mayor, Joe Riley, finally retired, and I was very happy that he left. I have noticed, by the way, because Joe Riley was trying to block the cruise ships from coming in, I have noticed that we've seen now Royal Caribbean came in. For the longest time, it was only Carnival that was here at the Charleston port. Now I've seen a Royal Caribbean ship. So there are turnarounds happening under Tecklenburg, but just not as quickly as I'd hoped for. Anyway, the platform that he ran on was to finish 526, which hasn't happened, and to get rid of Tent City. Well, he did that, but I noticed walking around downtown the other day, there are homeless people everywhere. So they got rid of the tents, and they've moved them into downtown, and it doesn't seem like they're doing anything about it. Very sad, the state of affairs. But updated with additional information, Disney CEO Bob Iger, this comes from Deadline, stands to be richly rewarded for his decision to postpone his retirement until 2021, according to a new analysis of his compensation package. ISS Analytics, the data analysis arm of the proxy advisory firm Institutional Shareholder Services, good Lord, estimates that Iger could earn as much as $423 million over the next 4 years if he hits all the performance goals in his compensation package. That also comes out of Reuters. That would rank Iger among the decade's highest paid CEOs in the U.S. Iger's generous compensation package suggests that Disney board believes he is singularly placed to lead the company over the next several years. Well, I would say so. In return for his extending his contract through 2021, Iger received a $25 million stock award vesting over 4 years, and more significantly, large incentives to close the 21st Century Fox deal quickly, after which he will receive an additional $16 million annually. An additional balloon payout targeted at $70 million at the end of 2021 is also in place. If all performance maximums are met, the total payout is going to be around $423 million. Unbelievable. But he's not the only one. I also saw this. Elon Musk could make more than $50 billion from pay plans shareholders approved, but he has a lot to deliver. Tesla shareholders have approved by a wide margin a proposal to award Chairman and CEO Elon Musk a massive multi-billion-dollar stock grant. That comes from a source at CNBC. Musk could earn more than $50 billion over the next several years if Tesla hits certain key milestones and stays on his current role at the company he co-founded. The source who reported the vote the vote count declined to be identified. Official vote totals will be announced in a filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission later Wednesday. The grant gives Musk $2.6 billion in stock options in 12 tranches that each vest as the company hits key performance milestones over 10 years. With that in mind, and I kind of wanted to use that as a launching pad into talking about this omnibus bill that we saw take place yesterday. But leading up to that bill, I saw this from Market Watch this week. It has taken little more than 6 months for the U.S. national debt to grow by $1 trillion, a quick clip that has little precedent over the nation's recent history. Last week, the debt hit, and this comes, by the way, from March 20th, to put it in perspective when it says last week. The debt hit $21 trillion for the first time, rising from the $20 trillion mark it notched on September 8th. The debt is guaranteed to go higher, with Trump signing a debt limit suspension in February, allowing unlimited borrowing through March 1st. Economists expect wider deficits to result from the tax cut Trump signed in December. While a $1 trillion increase over roughly 6 months isn't unprecedented, there was also one in 2009 during the Great Recession and another in 2010. It's certainly fast. The national debt exceeded $20 trillion in September 2017 after taking 20 months to add $1 trillion. A debt limit that has been in place since March 2015 was raised in March 2017 and again on September 8th. So again, just want to keep that in mind as we talk about the fact that the House has now okayed $1.3 trillion spending bill bolstering defense and domestic programs. The Senate must act to avert government shutdown. Well, they've all passed it, and they passed it very quickly, as Congressman had about 1,000 minutes to read this bill, which was 2,232 pages long, and it's worth $1.3 trillion. Now, it blows my mind. I don't pretend to really understand when we see these things that they have to pass these bills so quickly. I guess it has to do with these shutdown timelines. I really don't know. But what I know is that there are actually congressmen, and I've got the videos here, running around saying that they didn't actually get to read this thing, and they passed it anyway. Cardin, I didn't read every page of the omnibus. My staff did, and I knew about a large part of it months ago. This was on Friday's broadcast of CNN's The Situation Room. Senator Ben Cardin, is a Democrat out of Maryland, stated that he didn't read all of the omnibus bill, but his staff did, and yet they passed it for $1.3 trillion. This is unbelievable. Take a listen.
He said in his remarks today that nobody's been able to read all 2,200 pages of this omnibus spending bill. Did you read it?
No, I can't tell you that I read every page of it. My staff did. I read a good part of it. But once again, a large part of this bill we knew about months ago. Most of the appropriation issues have been through the committees. We had input. We've had conversations with the committee members and staff. So there weren't any surprises in there in regards to a lot of what's in this bill. A lot of the other provisions we've been working on for a long time, various issues from dealing with the tax issue that had to be corrected, the low-income housing tax credit. Senator Cantwell's been working on that for a long time. Many of us on the Finance Committee have been engaged on it. So there's a large part of this bill that represents a good deal of work that we've been doing ever since this Congress started.
But with all due respect, Senator, there's something awfully wrong, and I'm sure you admit this, when they come up with 2,200 pages on a Wednesday night. They make the House of Representatives vote Thursday morning. They make the Senate vote Thursday night. The president signs it into law on Friday. No one has a chance to review it thoroughly. They just go ahead and sort of blindly go along with what the leadership puts forward. There's something awfully wrong with this process where they wait so long to get something done.
Oh, I agree with you completely. There's something wrong with a process that passes a budget 6 months into the year rather than before the fiscal year begins. There's something wrong with a process where you load up a spending bill with a lot of non-spending items. That's what's in this omnibus. That's why it's called an omnibus bill. So the process is badly broken. Understand the Republicans control both the House, the Senate, and the White House, and yet they have led us down this path. I agree with you completely. It's wrong to bring a bill up to vote and not have time for the public to be able to understand it and to have input with the members before we vote. So you're absolutely right about that. The bottom line is that we're working on deadlines and that a lot of what's in this bill is very important for the American people.
So it's actually very wrong, according to him, but he signed it anyway. And that's, in my opinion, that's what's wrong with our legislative process at this point, is that you have these senators who are openly admitting to the fact that the process is wrong, that we shouldn't be doing this, and yet they're voting on it anyway. You can't throw a dart into my office right now and not have it land on an article about all of the things wrong with this omnibus spending bill, and I don't have time to get into everything. But in my opinion, this is a bit of a failure on the part of Trump. Now, I'm not going to sit here and just praise Trump every single Saturday and tell you that he's doing great, because he is doing some great things. We just talked about the trade deficit being attacked and the tariffs that are being put on China. But then he turns around and signs a $1.3 trillion omnibus spending bill. And the problem with it is that he didn't really even get anything out of it that he wanted. There is no funding for the wall. It does not fund 1,000 new deportation agents that he requested. It does not defund Planned Parenthood, by the way. These are all things that Trump was pushing for, that he had in his platform, and yet he signs this thing, which seems to me, considering that it includes things like a raise for the congressman, he's out here saying the border wall can wait. I mean, he just toured all of the different sample border walls. What was that, in February? Well, there's no funding for it, so he's not going to be able to start. In fact, I think this blocks him from starting actual construction on the wall. Representative Perry out of Texas, I'm sorry, not Texas, Pennsylvania, also says that you couldn't have read the omnibus before the House voted on it.
We have an opportunity now to talk with Pennsylvania Congressman Scott Perry, a Freedom Caucus member. And along with that title comes the expectation of smaller government and not a $1.3 trillion bill. Right. Talk to me.
Well, that's exactly right. I don't think anybody, Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, went home and campaigned saying they wanted to vote for the the largest spending increase in history, 13% above last year. And not only that, Harris, we got the bill 2,232 pages last night at 8:30. There was a night in there. You could have stayed. I was up past midnight in the Rules Committee with amendments, but you could have stayed up all night anyhow into right now and read the bill, and you still wouldn't be done. So, look, it's not good when the other side does it, and it's not good when this side does it. We want to know what we're voting on.
Yeah, I go back to Nancy Pelosi. We'll have to pass it to see what's in it.
Yeah, right,
This doesn't bode well.
Yeah, like I said, you can't be critical of that then and then come in here and say, well, we got a new president and this is our guys, so now it's okay. We want to fund our military. As a matter of fact, Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, and I walked up the rules a couple months ago with an amendment to fund the military at the highest level, but hold the line on the other spending, and it was rejected out of hand. I'm a person who served in uniform for over 30 years, so it's critically important. But I will tell you, military members don't want to bankrupt their country any more than anybody else does.
Yeah, I'm writing down a couple of notes as you're speaking, Congressman Perry, because I'm wondering, where are the conservatives like you in the party? Are you kind of are you becoming more extinct in the Republican Party? I don't know how to put it any more delicately than that.
Well, look, when it comes to the swamp, there's one thing that the swamp agrees on. It's spending the taxpayers' money. There's always agreement to be found there when it comes to trimming the budget and pulling your belts in and so on and so forth, like homeowners have to do when they're managing their budgets. There's not much of an appetite here for that, and you're seeing evidence of that right now. This is just where it is, and every time, I've been here for 5 years, Harris, every single time, we don't like the process. This has got to change. We can't keep doing this, yet every single time we keep doing the same thing, which is why folks like me say absolutely not. We're going to fight this with everything we have.
And this is exactly what Trump was supposed to be doing. He was supposed to be draining the swamp. And this is what you're seeing. This is the definition of the swamp when you have these senators who don't even know what they're voting on, but yet they're passing these massive spending bills with all of this stuff packed into it that just doesn't accomplish half of what Trump campaigned on. Do you have a problem with this? Because I do. And I'm just wondering, how do we put a stop to this? I mean, we're going to have to hold Trump, his feet to the fire on this. And I know he's probably trying to cooperate so that maybe they'll give him what he wants, but they're not giving him what he wants. That's the whole problem. And now he's vowed to never do it again, quote unquote. We'll see. But an unhappy President Donald Trump signed the spending bill into law on Friday, his second about face in 24 hours. Now, he actually came out and said he threatened to veto it. He put out a tweet saying, I'm considering a veto of the omnibus spending bill based on the fact that the 800,000 plus DACA recipients have been totally abandoned by the Democrats, not even mentioned in bill, and the border wall, which is desperately needed for our national defense. It is not fully funded. In fact, it's not funded at all, and you can take a listen to what Trump had to say.
As a matter of national security, I've signed this omnibus budget bill. There are a lot of things that I'm unhappy about in this bill. There are a lot of things that we shouldn't have had in this bill, but we were, in a sense, forced. If we want to build our military, we were forced to have. There are some things that we should have in the bill. But I say to Congress, I will never sign another bill like this again. I'm not going to do it again. Nobody read it. It's only hours old. Some people don't even know what it is. $1.3 trillion. It's the second largest ever. President Obama signed one that was actually larger, which I'm sure he wasn't too happy with either. But in this case, it became so big because we need to take care of our military and because the Democrats, who don't believe in that, added things that they wanted in order to get their votes. We have to get rid of the filibuster rule. We have to get rid of the filibuster rule.
And that filibuster rule is why they had to vote on it so quickly. All right, I'm out of time. In my opinion, this is a failure on the part of Trump, and it makes me sad to have to sit here and say that, especially after the tariffs that were put on China, because I thought that was a win. He's delivering on so many fronts. but then he delivers this flop into our laps, and I'm not sure what we're going to do about it. But nevertheless, you've been listening to the Sit and Spin Radio Show. I'm Nick O'Kelly. We come to you live every Saturday morning, 9 a.m. You can catch all the archives at Spreaker Web Radio, SPREAKER.com. Search for the Sit and Spin Radio Network. We'll see you next time. Have a great weekend. Tune in tomorrow night for To the Echo Radio Show with myself and Derek Daisy. Right here, same bat time, same bat channel next Saturday, but tomorrow night, look for that on Spreaker as well.
He's solid in the news.